The train platform smelled of rain and metal. She clutched the cracked leather strap of her small suitcase so tightly her knuckles whitened. Wind tugged at her hair, lifting strands into her eyes, but she didn't brush them away. Her gaze was fixed across the tracks, where a mother and her 2 children argued over backpacks and ticket stubs, voices swallowed by the roar of the approaching train. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the pulse in her chest that made every heartbeat feel like it could crack open her ribs. She drew the red scarf tighter around her neck, the fabric damp from the drizzle, and let it rest against her chin. It had belonged to someone she used to know, a person whose words still echoed in her head, "You'll never be a mom. That's not your life." The children laughed suddenly, and the sound made her stomach twist. The smaller one tripped over the edge of the platform, and she felt a pang of something she couldn't name, a mixture of longing and shame that pressed down on her lungs. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears that threatened to spill before anyone could notice. She didn't move closer. She never moved closer. She only watched. The mother's hand rested on the child's shoulder, firm and steady. The older sibling's backpack slid halfway off as he wrestled with it, a frustrated sigh breaking through the noise. She wondered what it would feel like to place her hands on someone that small, to steady them in a world that felt relentless. Her eyes drifted to the cracked watch around her wrist, its second hand jerking in uneven rhythm. Time had a way of slipping away, she thought, like sand through a fist. The red scarf and the small suitcase, her only companions on this rainy morning, felt heavier than usual, weighted with memory and unspoken questions. Somewhere behind her, a train whistle pierced the air. She flinched, gripping the suitcase strap tighter, but she didn't step forward. She just let the wind hit her face and imagined a different kind of life, a different kind of warmth that might never come. A voice barked from the platform speaker, "Train to Central Station, arriving in 2 minutes." She swallowed hard. Her eyes caught the mother bending down to pick up a dropped shoe, her fingers brushing against the child's hair. That small gesture, so ordinary, so tender, made something crack open inside her, a hollow she hadn't known existed. She didn't move. She couldn't. And yet, something inside her tightened, as if the universe had tilted, and she knew, though she didn't understand why, that this moment, this station, this red scarf, would haunt her forever. The train thundered closer, and the platform vibrated beneath her feet. She exhaled slowly, silently, and let the silence between the raindrops swallow her whole. The suitcase at her feet felt heavier now, as if it carried not just clothes but decades of doubts. She traced a finger along the cracked leather strap, and her mind drifted backward, into a memory that made her chest tighten. She was 7, perched on the edge of the worn kitchen table, clutching a small, faded bag that looked almost identical to this one. Her father had leaned over, his voice low but firm. "Life isn't kind to everyone, sweetheart. You'll have to carry your own weight sometimes." She remembered nodding, the weight of his words pressing into her small shoulders, even as her father reached out, hand hovering just above hers before withdrawing. That pause, that unspoken distance, had lodged itself in her bones. A shiver ran through her now as the train screeched to a slow stop. She glanced at the mother and children again, their laughter mixing with the hiss of brakes and the smell of wet concrete. Her own loneliness pressed in, sharp and cold. She had worked every late night, every weekend, scrimping and counting coins, trying to prove, maybe to herself, that she was enough, that she could build a life worth loving. But the empty apartment waiting for her at the end of the day whispered a different story. The red scarf tangled in her fingers, soaking in the drizzle. It was more than a piece of cloth. It was memory, defiance, a fragile shield against the world that had told her she'd never be a mom. She had bought it at a thrift shop 2 years ago, the price barely covering it, but it had felt like claiming a small victory. Every frayed edge, every faint stain, reminded her she had survived, even when the world doubted her. She noticed him then, a man standing a few steps behind, leaning slightly against a pillar. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched her, eyes steady and unblinking, like he was measuring the silence around her. The presence was almost unbearable, a quiet tension pressing against her. Was he waiting for someone? Was he judging her? Or simply observing? The platform shifted as families reunited, parents kneeling to scoop up children, suitcases dropped with joyful relief. She let her gaze fall to the wet tiles, counting droplets in a vain attempt to steady her pulse. Her suitcase scraped lightly against the platform edge as she shifted weight, almost wishing she could vanish among the crowd. The stranger's quiet gaze tugged at the back of her mind, an invisible thread she couldn't cut. Her fingers tightened around the scarf again, heart hammering. The train doors opened fully, and a gust of wind pushed the rain against her face. She hesitated, suitcase in hand, body frozen between leaving and staying. Someone called a name somewhere down the platform, a delayed goodbye or perhaps an invitation she couldn't interpret. Her lips parted, unsure whether to speak or run. A confused smile flickered across her face, fleeting and fragile, like a candle struggling against the wind. And then, she stopped, letting the rain coat her skin, letting the world pause with her. Rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier, hammering the platform in irregular bursts. The girl pressed the red scarf closer to her chest as puddles formed around her shoes. The stranger remained a few steps away, hands tucked into the pockets of a threadbare coat. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, yet something in the tilt of his head suggested he was aware of her every movement. She noticed the worn leather of his shoes, scuffed at the toes, soles thin from overuse. A glimpse of a photograph peeked from the corner of his wallet as he adjusted his coat, a small child, a woman smiling too brightly for a still image, edges curling with age. It struck her like a cold gust. Here was someone else carrying invisible weight, someone else who had loved and lost and learned how heavy it could feel. Her own suitcase felt suddenly lighter in comparison, but her chest still ached. She saw herself reflected in him, the careful vigilance, the quiet guarding of hope, the way life had forced them both to shrink inside themselves while the world moved past. For a heartbeat, she wondered if this was the universe showing her a mirror, or if she had simply imagined connection where none existed. Thunder rolled across the city like a distant warning. Wind whipped through her hair, teasing strands across her damp face. She wanted to leave, to step onto a train and vanish, but some magnetic pull rooted her in place. She felt the tension coiling in her gut, a question without an answer. Could she allow herself to trust, to hope, to risk again? He shifted slightly, and for a moment their eyes met. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost like a smirk, almost like recognition, but gone before she could decide. His silence was deliberate, almost a test, a quiet invitation to see whether she would confront it, or retreat. She clutched the scarf harder, feeling the frayed edges press into her palms. Rain ran down her neck, into her coat, but she didn't move. Her mind spun through possibilities. Perhaps he was a stranger, perhaps he was a sign, perhaps she was fooling herself. Every rational thought warred with the ache in her chest, a voice whispering, "Stay. Watch. Learn." Lightning split the sky, brief and harsh, illuminating the wet platform, the suitcase, the scarf, and his shadowed face. The moment stretched, fragile, charged, and unknowable. She felt her resolve teetering between flight and curiosity, between fear and fascination. The train's horn echoed again, closer this time. She stepped back instinctively, yet her gaze lingered. The stranger adjusted the photograph in his wallet and looked away, as if he, too, was struggling with unseen burdens. She exhaled slowly, letting the rain soak her, letting the tension hang thick and unresolved. The platform felt endless, a liminal space where decisions had not yet been made and truths had not yet been revealed. And in that hesitation, in the space between departing and staying, the story refused to answer her. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the platform slick and glistening under the dull yellow lights. She shifted the small suitcase from one hand to the other, the cracked leather now feeling like an extension of her own anxious heartbeat. She almost walked away, almost let the crowd swallow her whole, but something made her pause, an instinct she couldn't name. Across the tracks, the stranger's eyes met hers again. This time, he held something, the red scarf. It wasn't tossed carelessly, it was draped over his hand, fingers curling around it as if it had become a talisman, a fragile emblem of trust, or perhaps a challenge. Her breath caught. The scarf had always been hers, a shield against the world, and now, in his hands, it felt transformed, heavier with meaning. Somewhere behind them, a child laughed, a sharp sound that made her flinch. She felt the weight of everyone's gaze, even though no one looked directly at her. People murmured, glancing at the girl with the suitcase, at the man holding the scarf, at the brief spark of connection that felt almost too intimate to exist in public. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence, she thought, tracing the edges of the scarf in memory. She swallowed, throat tight, as her fingers brushed the suitcase again. Memories surged, nights counting coins, quiet apartments smelling of dust and faint perfume, the echo of words she had carried her whole life, "You'll never be a mom." The wind tugged at her hair, and she shivered, wondering if she could endure the pull of both fear and hope. He took a small step forward, not closer enough to touch, but closer enough to matter. The red scarf shifted in his hand with that subtle motion, a silent message she wasn't ready to decode. Her heart thudded painfully, the rhythm clashing with the distant hum of the station. She almost turned, almost ran, almost dissolved into the anonymity of commuters and luggage. But her gaze lingered. The scarf, the suitcase, the stranger, they were a puzzle she couldn't leave unsolved. Her fingers tightened around the suitcase handle, knuckles white, and she exhaled slowly, letting the damp air fill her lungs. A mother passing by gave her a brief look, eyes flicking between judgment and curiosity, before pulling her child closer. A small, almost invisible acknowledgement of society's quiet measure of her choices, her hesitations. The stranger's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again, unreadable. The red scarf, once a shield, now seemed to hum between them like an unspoken promise or a warning. She stayed rooted, unsure whether she was drawn by fate or by her own longing. And there, in the drizzle, between wet tiles and whispered glances, the moment held, unbroken and unresolved, teetering on the edge of everything she feared, and everything she might finally want. The train's distant roar had faded, leaving only the soft drizzle tapping the platform and the low hum of fluorescent lights. She shifted the suitcase once more, heart still lodged somewhere between fear and curiosity. The stranger's gaze met hers, but this time, it carried something different, an intensity that made her stomach tighten. Her eyes drifted to the red scarf in his hands. A sudden realization hit her, it wasn't just a piece of cloth, it had a story she hadn't guessed. It belonged to your daughter," she whispered, almost too softly for him to hear. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the scarf fall through his fingers and drape over the railing, a gesture of both grief and trust. The weight of the object shifted, not just in her hands or in memory, but in the air between them. Suddenly, the scarf wasn't just hers, wasn't just a shield, it was a bridge, a fragile tether connecting their pasts, their losses, and their unspoken needs. Her mind flickered to a phrase she hadn't heard in years, her father's voice echoing in her childhood kitchen, "You'll have to carry your own weight sometimes." Only now, it carried a new resonance. She realized she hadn't just carried her own weight all these years, she'd been preparing, unknowingly, for this very collision of lives, for the moment where her loneliness intersected with someone else's grief. And then came the twist she never expected, the stranger's phone buzzed quietly in his coat pocket. He glanced at it, and the faintest shadow of surprise crossed his face. The company she had just applied to, he owned it. Her chest seized. Every late night, every cover letter, every painstakingly revised resume suddenly felt like stepping onto a precipice she hadn't known existed. The world had shifted under her feet without warning. Her fingers clutched the suitcase tighter, knuckles paling. This wasn't coincidence. This was collision, fate, or some cruel alignment of chance that dared her to stand still. She realized she couldn't walk away anymore, not from the scarf, not from him, not from the doorway she now faced. With a trembling hand, she pushed the suitcase forward and stepped toward the building entrance, the glass doors looming like the threshold of something irreversible. Rain ran down her neck, down her coat, but she didn't care. Every step carried her closer to a point of no return, the emotional weight of years, losses, and hope pressing into her spine like an invisible hand. She inhaled, heart pounding in a rhythm both frightening and exhilarating, and crossed the threshold. Inside, decisions waited that would shift everything she thought she knew about life, love, and the fragile boundaries between them. The platform was quieter now, almost empty, the echoes of footsteps and distant train whistles softened by the drizzle. She stood where she had first watched, years ago, a mother and her children laughing across the tracks. The wind tugged at her hair the same way, but now she felt a strange steadiness in her chest. She had changed. She was no longer merely observing life, she was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The stranger stepped forward, eyes fixed on her. The red scarf, damp and crumpled from its journey, hung loosely around his hand. He extended it toward her with a hesitance that betrayed an old sorrow. "I thought, maybe you should have this back," he said softly. His voice carried more than words, it carried memory, grief, and recognition. She reached for it, fingers brushing the fabric. A shock ran through her, not from cold, but from the realization that the scarf had completed its journey. It had traveled from her hands to his and back again, carrying the weight of past losses and the fragile possibility of connection. She clutched it to her chest for one brief moment and then let it slip into her coat pocket, the gesture more gift than claim. He hesitated, gaze faltering. He began, then stopped. She saw it then, he wasn't choosing her for love, not entirely. He was choosing her because she reminded him of someone he had lost, someone irreplaceable. Yet he looked at her not with regret, but with a kind of reverent trust, a recognition of her resilience. Her suitcase, once heavy with uncertainty, felt lighter now. She exhaled, letting rain wash over her, and for the first time, she allowed herself a quiet surrender. She realized that what she was giving up, the illusion of control, the certainty of what might have been, was necessary for this moment. Her heart didn't demand ownership, only clarity. The city around them continued its hum. Commuters passed, oblivious to the intimate exchange unfolding on wet tiles. Somewhere, a child's laughter rang out. She smiled faintly, a soft, private acknowledgement of her own endurance. The stranger turned away, stepping onto a train bound elsewhere. She didn't stop him. He looked back once, eyes meeting hers with a flicker of gratitude, and then the doors closed. She stood alone, the scarf warm against her chest, the suitcase at her side, and the platform empty but alive with memory and possibility. For the first time, she understood the truth of her own words, spoken years ago to a silent room. Some people cross your path not to stay, but to leave traces on your soul. She breathed in the rain, letting it cleanse what remained of fear and doubt. And as the train vanished into the distance, she whispered to herself, half laughing, half mourning, "Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever." The streets were wet, glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. She walked alone, the small suitcase replaced now by a simple tote, light and manageable. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, as if the city beneath her feet were no longer threatening but familiar, a companion rather than an obstacle. The wind teased her hair, but she didn't flinch. She had learned to meet the world's unpredictability with a quiet, steady resolve. At her apartment, the red scarf rested folded in a drawer, sunlight slipping over its frayed edges through the half-open blinds. It smelled faintly of rain and memory, of hands that had held it and hearts that had carried it across years of longing. She ran her fingers over it briefly, a soft smile touching her lips. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition, she whispered to herself, the words echoing like a gentle bell in the quiet room. Recognition of pain, resilience, loss, and the small, sacred victories that went unnoticed by the world. From her window, she watched children laughing across a distant park, the way they collided and recovered, their joy unguarded and immediate. She remembered standing on a train platform, the weight of years pressing into her chest, and realized how far she had come. She had been a spectator once, measuring life through someone else's lens, and now she moved through it with intention, observing and participating all at once. Her thoughts drifted to the stranger, to the brief, charged moments on the platform where unspoken histories met and separated again. She didn't dwell on his choices or the paths they hadn't taken together. Instead, she held the memory lightly, like a photograph pressed between pages of a journal, visible, poignant, but not burdensome. Even the apartment felt different now, quieter but filled with subtle acknowledgement, the hum of the heater, the faint tick of her old cracked watch, the red scarf folded like a relic of survival. It was a space for reflection, not resolution, a room where she could allow herself to breathe and exist without judgment or expectation. She exhaled, leaning against the windowsill, and let the late afternoon light wash over her. The city carried on, indifferent and beautiful, a rhythm she had once longed to belong to but now moved through with gentle authority. And as she turned away, letting the scarf rest and the day unfold, one thought lingered at the edge of consciousness. Some doors we never open are the ones that teach us the most about what we carry inside. It hung there, unfinished, a quiet invitation for memory, for longing, for anyone willing to reflect on the weight and grace of what it means to endure, and to arrive.